Hi everyone, welcome to the CZ Armor channel. Today I got something special for you. I got not only one but two guns that we're going to be looking to. So we have the CZ Shadow 2 optics ready and a Tanfoglio Stock 2 optics ready that we're going to be doing a comparison between the two in terms of internals, design, architecture, balance, weight, all that kind of stuff. We're going to be looking to both of them and doing some comparisons and that hopefully give you some insight on what's different, what's the same, what's interchangeable between these two guns, possibly why one part is different than the other, and so on. Why I picked these two guns, you might be asking. Well, it's important to get a little bit of a history here, and please take that with a grain of salt. I'm not really an expert in history of firearms or anything like that. I'm going to tell you what I was able to research and understand about the history behind these two guns. So the Tanfoglio, Fabbrica d'Armi Tanfoglio Giuseppe is how they're called in Italian, I think. Forgive my Italian, it's terrible, but there it is. It's how they're called originally. They start designing parts for firearms in the 1940s, and then they start doing their own design for firearms in the 60s. On the 80s, they decided to basically de-emphasize their own design and design their new firearms from that point on based on the CZ75 platform. So one could say that these are clones. That the Stock 2 is basically a clone of Shadow 2. Again, probably this is gonna cause a lot of reaction in the comments. Feel free to disagree. Feel free to give me a lesson on the history here. I'm not an expert. My point here is just to give you some context on why I'm looking into these two models, these two guns. They're both very, very popular in US and abroad as options for competitive practical shooting. So both excellent platforms, both excellent guns. One thing I'm going to take out of the way, what this video is not about. So you don't waste your time and continue watching looking for something that's not going to be in this video. I'm not going to do any live fire tests with these guns. I'm not going to do any head-to-head comparison. Everything I'm going to say here obviously is my opinion, but I will try to stay away from the opinion of this one shoots better than that one, or this one is faster, shoots more flat, or anything like that. This is not going to be what this video is about. It's basically kind of a showing their internals, showing their parts, and telling you, hopefully giving some insights on what is very similar, what's not so similar, what's different between them, and my take on why they're different in that sense. So if you're interested in that, then stay tuned and we're going to start with that. Okay, so we can start with the obvious differences, the ones that are visible, and also what we can tell just looking at the spec sheets of each of these guns. So to start with, what they have in common, they're both double action, single action guns, hammer fired. They both weigh about the same, 43 ounces dry weight. The first difference you can notice there, the Tanfoglio on paper would come in different calibers. You can have 38 Super, 9mm, 10mm, 45 I believe. There are other calibers that you can have in this platform. The CZ Shadow 2, it's only offered in 9mm. So that's a difference on paper right there. The barrel length. The CZ Shadow 2 is a 4.89 inch barrel, while the Tanfoglio is a 4.45 inch barrel. So the Tanfoglio is a little bit shorter. You can tell when you put the two guns here side by side. You can tell the Shadow is a little bit longer. On the front, there's a little bit more barrel length here. The other thing that is, you probably won't see these on paper, but we can confirm here, is that the Tanfoglio Stock 2 comes in two options. You can have a large frame or small frame. That's the thing Tanfoglio does. CZ Shadow 2 will only come, it's a fixed size frame, and it's kind of a comparable to what this small frame in the Stock 2 would be. This is a large frame one, and that's also, as far as I understand, the most popular one that you would see out there. But they also do a small frame. They also do kind of the same frame length or same frame width of the Shadow 2. So here we can confirm this differences real quick on the frame. Like if I measure the width here on the Shadow 2 of the magwell area here to kind of get the width of the frame, it's about a 25.5mm. If I go in the Tanfoglio and I do the same measurement, it's a 28.87mm. So definitely a wider frame in a Tanfoglio. The other thing that I don't know if that's on paper or not, probably is, but we're gonna look into this in detail, is The Shadow 2 uses a straight barrel with bushing, with a bushing system at the end, while the Tanfoglio Stock II, this one that I have here, is a bull barrel without a bushing. So that has some implications that we're going to talk about as well. So having said that, I think this is all you can tell just based on the paper, either the spec sheet or just visually inspecting the gun. About the frame still, like I said, Tanfoglio offers small and large frame. CZ Shadow 2, it's only what would be comparable to the small frame. The CZs do have a large frame configuration, and that's on the Tactical Sports family. So this is the Tactical Sports 2, the Tactical Sports, the Tactical Sports Orange, the Checkmate. They're all, well, what would you call a large frame? So much so that the magazines amongst all the Tactical Sports family, they are interchangeable, but they don't take the Shadow 2 or the other CZ75s, SPO1, etc., Shadow 1 and all. They don't take those magazines and vice versa. So having said that, let's take these slides out and start looking into them inside. All right, they both take down the same way. You get this slide release out, and then you separate the frame from slide. That's with the Tanfoglio. I already kind of released the slide release here. That's in the Shadow. So let's check on the slide to see the similarities and differences here real quick before we go into the frame. So as I told you before, you got a guiding rod, about the same system here in both of them. They don't have exactly the same design, but they work exactly the same way. The springs are interchangeable. Same spring will work for a Tanfoglio or a CZ or Shadow 2. This spring here is much longer, it's probably less used, and a little bit heavier than this one here in the Tanfoglio, but you can tell the system is about the same here. This is not the original guiding rod. I think this is a brass guiding rod. The original one, it's steel, so, but same design, not much of a difference here. Bull barrel on the, you got the little plug here, the spring plug here out. You got the spring plug out, that's different than the Shadow 2 already. You got this spring plug out, and then the barrel comes to the front as a bull barrel. What you see there. And then the Shadow 2, obviously, the barrel comes from the back. Now I can compare the size of the barrels. You can tell the Shadow 2 is slightly longer barrel than the Tanfoglio. Very different, massive bull barrel here in the Tanfoglio, and just like a skinny straight barrel in the Shadow 2. They do have that difference there. Extractor, absolutely the same design. Not absolutely the same design, sorry. They are the same design, the same system. They're not interchangeable, so they're not exact the same, but they work exact the same way. So you got the extractor in the Shadow 2 here. There's a spring behind it and a counter pin to hold it in place. You can see the pin here in this part of the slide. This it's a solid pin, and this is the Shadow 2. And the Tanfoglio is a roll pin. I think they really like roll pins. Everything in this gun, everything pin-wise, except maybe for the hammer counter pin and the one little tiny pin that is used in the trigger bar spring in the Tanfoglio system. Except for those pins, as far as I remember, everything else is a roll pin. They're also larger diameter than the Shadow by design. For most pins like trigger pin and others, they are a little bit larger, a little bit wider diameter than they are in the Shadow. But the system of the extractor nonetheless is exactly the same. So you got the extractor here, spring behind the counter pin that holds everything in place. So here's something you can notice when you have the Tanfoglio slide here, while I have it here. The Tanfoglio has a firing pin block. The Shadow 2 does not have that. Actually, most of the, if not all of the CZ competition-oriented guns like Shadow 1, Shadow 2, the Tactical Sports series, none of them have a firing pin block. The Tanfoglio kept the firing pin block on their guns. There is one pretty cool thing about the firing pin block system, in particular in the Tanfoglio, that I noticed different than on the CZ guns, which have firing pin block, like the SPO1 for instance. One difference here is the firing pin block plunge, normally on the CZ and other guns that I've seen with firing pin block, they're normally decompressed. They're normally like that until you pull the trigger, and then a lever will push this down, will compress that, or depress rather the firing pin plunge, compressing that spring so it releases the firing pin, lets the firing pin move freely to the front. This is not how Tanfoglio. The issue with that is that as you're pulling the trigger, your trigger is also something, either the sear or a lever somewhere, or even the trigger bar. Some system is going to be pushing against that, so that resistance from the spring on the 5-pin block plunge is actually adding to the trigger weight. And if Tanfoglio has a very smart system here in which it's normally compressed, so this is normally depressed, and as you pull the trigger, the lever gets out of the way and let this let the plunge come surface up, which then releases the firing pin. So it's the opposite system. What this does, the advantage of doing this is that it actually helps the trigger pull as opposed to offer resistance to it. So if you have a heavy firing pin block plunge spring, it's going to reduce the trigger pull weight. So that's pretty ingenious of the Tanfoglio design. Let's see what else is different here. I think in terms of, well, the firing pin block, the firing pin systems is exactly the same. It's held in place by a firing pin plate in the back, like you can see here in the Tanfoglio and here in the CZ, in the Shadow II. Exactly the same system. The firing pin design itself is different because of the firing pin block, as we talked about before. And that also makes it, the firing pin spring in the Tanfoglio, it's a much longer spring than it is in the CZ Shadow II. So none of these parts are actually interchangeable. They are kind of the same design, but they don't really look alike, and you can't really use a firing pin from a Shadow II and a Tanfoglio and vice versa. It's just not going to work. So just as a reference, this is what a Tanfoglio firing pin looks like. So you can see there is the notch there to accommodate for the firing pin block plunge. Everything else kind of pretty similar. And then a much longer, skinnier spring. This is what a CZ Shadow II firing pin looks like. There is no such a notch because there's no firing pin block on it. Everything else similar, but the spring is very different. Much shorter, much thicker spring. So both use the same system, but different parts. And this is kind of it, I think, in terms of slide differences. This is all we can talk about. We can see the weight of this slide. There's a big difference here in the weight. Let me see, just for reference, how much. And there you have different optics, but let's see if the difference is significant. I would expect the Tanfoglio slide to be lighter. So that's measuring 11.7 ounces. Is that ounces? Yes, 11.7 ounces for the Tanfoglio. And the Shadow is measuring 14.6 ounces. So about 3 ounces heavier, the slide on the Shadow. And I'm going to attribute that to the fact that it is a longer slide to accommodate for the longer barrel. So there is more mass, or if you want to call it reciprocating mass, in the Shadow II than there is in the Tanfoglio. We're going to talk a little bit more about the weight distribution and how the fact that it's large frame versus small frame, bull barrel versus skinny barrel versus straight barrel, all those things, slide heavy in one and the other. How does it feel in terms of weight, and what we can expect from those differences. Right, now that we got the slides out of the way, pretty much I think we covered every difference and similarity there. Let's look what it looks. Let's look at what it looks inside the frame. So I'm going to put both of them here side by side, so we can start looking at what is similar and what is different, and so on. So what can we see here? Well, they both have the same system, ejector, kind of an ejector surrounding the sear, so we can call this a sear cage. Very similar systems on both sides. The sear itself, it's very similar as well. The difference you're going to see here, and this is not an OEM sear on the Tanfoglio. This is a Patriot Defense a single piece sear. So it has this leg extended here, if you will. This in the original one is a separate lever to manipulate the firing pin block plunge. So Patriot Defense has this smart idea of just put it all together as one piece, so there's less moving parts, and you can have a better trigger in the Tanfoglio by doing that. But this is what this leg is that you don't see here on the sear of the Shadow II, because there is no firing pin block. This is also not the OEM sear. not the stock sear of the Shadow. This is a billet sear, billet adjustable sear for Cajun gun. Also a very smart idea they had. They pretty much have this set screw here in the top that is used to adjust the height of this side relative to the safety. So when you put their race hammer and their, just like as part of their kits, you use their race hammer, it does change the angle that the sear interacts with the hammer, and therefore your safety stops working unless you either adjust the sear or fit the safety to make one work with the other. So the solution they offer is you got this adjustable sear, and then you can adjust whatever you would have to fit. You just between the sear and the safety, you just use the set screw to adjust the height of it, and there's no need for fitment. So pretty good idea here too. But both, back to the comparison here, both work the same way, same system. The safety engages the same way underneath this piece, this leg here of the sear. One difference in the safety is that on the Shadow II, you have detents on each side. This side has a detent spring. This side is just a detent that kind of keeps the safety in place, and the safety is eventually locked with the sear cage through the sear spring. So that's also the same mechanism here. It locks through the sear spring. You can see that little sear spring leg there that goes into the notch of the safety rod. Same thing on this side. Well, I was talking about the detents. In the Shadow II, you have the pair of detents. In the Tanfoglio, you have no detents. There is actually a little detent that is built in the safety. It's spring-loaded on the left side to give that click, that positive engagement. But it's not a separate part just like it is for the Shadow II. The safety on the right side, though, is kept in place by a pin. So it's different than the Shadow. The Shadow is at that internal detent. Here in the Tanfoglio, there is a pin. I don't know if you can see there. There's a pin right here, a roll pin that goes through the safety rod from the right side and then keeps everything in place. So a pretty simple system. Not really I wouldn't say not really a significant difference. Safety operates the same way. Sears are the same. So here's for comparison. I have both sears here in my hand. So this is an OEM sear for the Shadow II. That's the leg that the safety engages on. There's no lag on the right side because there's no firing pin block plunge. And then you got the one-piece Patriot Defense safety for the Tanfoglio. So same thing, that one leg, extended leg on the left side where the safety engages with, and then on the right side you have this extended one to interact with the firing pin block plunge. But shape is the same. Like if you look from this angle, they're gonna look like pretty much the same system. Try to put them this side by side here for comparison. So they look like the same, right? So pretty similar. We're going to, let's see what else. Trigger bar is the same design. None of these parts, except maybe for the springs, like the sear spring is actually interchangeable. You can probably use the sear spring of either gun in the other gun. It works fine. Your trigger return spring is also exactly the same system, and the springs are interchangeable as well. The trigger shoe is not, and the trigger bar is not, because, well, they're not exactly the same geometry. They don't interact exactly the same way, but also, I think I mentioned before that the holes and the pins in the Tanfoglio are a little wider diameter than the Shadow. So one thing I did in the past is like I did adapt a Shadow II trigger to a Tanfoglio, and it works quite well. For those, someone that likes that trigger shoe from the Shadow II much better than the Tanfoglio one. The original one from the Tanfoglio is like a it's almost like a 180-degree, very, very curved trigger. Not everybody likes that. The Shadow is a little bit kind of a more subtle, more smoother curve, and then you can actually adapt that. You can just make bigger holes in the trigger so the trigger will go through, and the geometry between that and the trigger bar works fine. We're gonna do now. Well, one more thing here before we start going to disassemble the whole thing and start looking at parts individually. There is, I don't know if you're gonna be able to see this, but there is a guide that goes right here under the trigger. Let me see, maybe the other side is better. Oh yeah, right there, right here. Yeah, right here where I'm pointing. This is kind of I think it's a trigger bar guide. And it's a spring-loaded, basically a piston that is positioned underneath the trigger bar, and that's what pushes the trigger bar up, and it helps, you know, reset the trigger and all those things. Very, very, very different design than the Shadow 2. The Shadow 2 doesn't have that piston, if you will, the trigger bar guide, as they call it. You see, there's nothing there. Where you have, sorry, right here, where you have there underneath the trigger bar is basically a flat screw, and that flat screw keep both springs for the mag release button and the trigger bar spring under, like, you know, in place. And I will remove both springs and show you what they look like, but these are completely different systems, and as a consequence, your mag release button is also completely different between the Tanfoglio and the Shadow. We're gonna go take this apart and go into those parts in detail now. All right, so we're gonna start taking it apart and checking the internals. What is similar, what is different between these two guns. Let's see. So you take the grip panels, pretty much the same system between the Tanfoglio and this is the Shadow 2. It's one screw here inside. Screw the same as the Torx 220, I believe. Yep, a 220. These are not the stock grips, but same system. So I'm going to take just one grip of the Shadow, just for us to compare. Some things I want to show here. But I have most of the Shadow parts on the side here. I don't need to take it apart to compare with what we find in the Tanfoglio. So here's the first interesting difference. On the mainspring, which in the Shadow 2, it stays inside this housing here, this little area. The Tanfoglio has, it's like the mag brake is a solid piece integrated with the frame, which is different than the Shadow 2. Shadow 2 is kind of a hollow area where the mainspring is, you know, occupies the whole space, and then you have this blade here, the mag brake, called the mag brake, to protect the magazine from the spring, or protect the spring from the magazine, of course. But this changes the design of the mainspring. Like, this is a very long mainspring compared to the Tanfoglio mainspring. So I'm going to take the Tanfoglio mainspring out, and we'll be able to see the difference here. But there are other implications here too. Weight, for instance, right? This area is hollow to be able to house the mainspring, while this area in the Tanfoglio has this piece of steel here integrated with the frame. This seems to be thicker too. Next is we're going to take the safety off. Another difference between the Tanfoglio and the CZ Shadow 2. The Shadow 2, all you have to do to take the safety off, which in both guns is what kind of holds the sear cage in place, is you just raise the sear spring leg, this here in the middle, which is what locks the safety rod in place. You raise that while you push the safety out, and the safety comes out. And with that, you release the sear cage. In the Tanfoglio, you have both. There is a sear spring here, same thing, that leg that holds, you know, the same system as the CZ. However, the safety on the right side, different than the CZ. In the CZ, you have a detent, internal detent, that keeps that safety in place. Here, it's a counter pin that goes through the safety rod on the left side. So you need to remove this pin. So let's get this pin out. Right. That's a small pin. Then we can pull the safety, right side safety off. It comes out. And now we do the same system we were doing in the Shadow 2, which is raise that sear spring, the leg of that sear spring, while you push the safety at the same time. And I'm going to hold the sear cage, because once the safety is out, the sear cage is under tension here. It's going to try to jump out. But all I have to do is pull it, and the safety comes out, and your sear cage or ejector is out. safety itself, it's pretty much the same system too. The difference here is that there's a plunge. Try to make you see. This plunge here is integrated with the safety, and it is what makes the positive engagement, the click up and down. On the CZ, you have a little plunge with the spring that is separated from the safety that goes on the left side. That creates that same effect. So once that's out, we're gonna take the hammer out and I'll show you the mainspring. To get the hammer out is the same exact system as the CZ Shadow II. So these two guns have the same system. You have, this is the hammer pin, and there's a counter pin here, as you can see, vertical, perpendicular to the hammer pin, that prevents the hammer pin to come out. So you need to remove this counter pin first. Same thing in the Shadow II. You're going to see there. So those are the things that Tanfoglio just used, exactly the same system. Well, I'm going to push that out. Big to finish pushing this out. It should fall out. There we go. Little tiny pin that works as a counter pin, holding the hammer pin in place. Now, one difference from the Shadow II, like you would not remove the hammer first in the Shadow II. You would do what you would do here. The smart thing to do is you remove this pin, remove the spring cup, the main spring cup, and the main spring. So you take all the tension of this area out, and then you do what I just did: get the counter pin out, the hammer pin, and pull the hammer out without any effort, without any issue. Now with the Tanfoglio, you cannot relieve the pressure because of the tension, because the main spring is inside. This area is completely sealed. There's no way for me to get access to the main spring. It has to be accessed from the top, and that's where the hammer is. So basically the hammer is on the way. So you need to take the hammer out while it is under tension, with the hammer spring compressed. So a little bit different, but nonetheless still simple system. I'm gonna hold the hammer in place here and just use a pin, a punch to push this out. Get my hammer pin out, get my punch out, and now slowly raise the hammer. So big difference here between, oops, I got the pin. I got the pin of the disconnector, or interrupter in this case, out. So it slipped out and put it back in place. There you go. So same system as you see in the Shadow II here. You got in the Shadow II, this is called disconnector in this gun, and then Tanfoglio is called interrupter, but same piece, does the same part, same function on the gun. Have the hammer and then the hammer strut. Very small, very short one, obviously, because this is how tiny the mainspring is in the Tanfoglio. Like for reference, I have a mainspring here off a Shadow II that I can get just to show you. Here's the difference. So the blue one is a Shadow II mainspring, the yellow one is a Tanfoglio mainspring. Very different, right? Very different. Same system, but different designs here. Therefore, the hammer strut goes all the way to the bottom of the mainspring, so it's this long as opposed to that short hammer strut that you see in the Tanfoglio. Also, it's a good time to talk about the interrupter. The design you have here, let me get what a disconnect in the Shadow II looks like. So this is not OEM. Well, I've got one that is not OEM for the Shadow II either. So I've got an aftermarket disconnector from the Shadow II as well. So this is what the disconnector, the T6 disconnector from Cajun Gun Works looks like. And this is what the Bolo interrupter looks like. The Bolo is from Patriot Defense. They produce a lot of great parts for upgrades for Tanfoglios. And this is what the Cajun Gun T6 disconnector for the Shadow II looks like. So this interrupter here is very oversized, much bigger, and you basically need to take a lot of material and feed it all over the place here to make sure it fits perfect to the gun. But then it's like it's a perfect fit, right? The T6 In the past, you would need to feed as well to cut that pre-travel from single action, but I believe Cajun has been doing more of a hybrid disconnector now, and it's mostly a drop in. So we lost that ability to feed and make it perfect for the gun, but kind of a same part. They do use edges on opposite sides here, but it really, let me see if you can see that. I'm trying to hold it so the pin doesn't come out, and I can show you. Yeah, you can see there's edges on opposite sides. It doesn't matter because the trigger bar actually has that notch on both sides. So to engage. All right, with that, we basically covered everything. Like, this gun is completely taken apart. There's one more part here that we didn't talk about, but we won't because it's not worth it. It's the slide release button that is on the side here of the gun, the spring of that slide. So it's the same system on both guns. You have a spring here in this area here, and then there's a pin that holds that spring in place on the side. Same exact system for the Shadow. The shape of the springs are a little different, but same thing. The spring of the Shadow goes here, it gets into the frame here and at the side, and then it goes inside that notch, and it's kept under place, under tension by this little pin on the side of the frame here. So this is what's left. Like, we talked about every possible thing here, I guess. Let me know in the comments if I forgot anything. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put everything together. Outside the video, I don't need to show you how to put this all together right now because that's not the purpose of this video. And then I'm gonna run to kind of a close up the video with some conclusions and some things I think some things I didn't say before, and I think they're interesting about how these guns are different from each other, not just from all the designs, all the parts and mechanics that we've explored in this video, but how, in my view, the most important difference between these two guns is weight balance. It's how they really balance what is the center of gravity in each of these guns, and how different they are from each other. So we're gonna go into that after I put this one together. All right, so just to conclude this video, it looks like we went through the whole video here. There are more similarities than differences, but there's still significant differences between these guns. They are technically, the Tanfoglio is kind of based on the same design as the CZ75, the CZ Shadow II, the Stock II, and but the parts, as you saw throughout the video, some are even interchangeable, so similar they are. Some things like the trigger bar guide on the Tanfoglio versus the trigger bar spring on the CZ Shadow II, completely different designs. But here's the thing that I think is the most significant difference between these two guns, and in my view, is the weight balance. The fact that the Tanfoglio is a larger frame versus a small frame in a CZ Shadow II, and a shorter slide, lighter slide. Both guns have about the same overall weight, but the Tanfoglio has a shorter slide and a lighter slide compared to the Shadow II. So that means most of the weight is in the frame versus the Shadow II, which is okay, which is kind of expected considering, being the larger frame compared to a smaller frame. There's also the fact that the design of the mainspring, as you guys saw, allows the Tanfoglio to have more weight in this area since the mainspring is shorter and the housing of the mainspring is just really up to here versus the whole body of the frame in the Shadow II, which makes it hollow all the way to the bottom. So there's that advantage too, or that not advantage, but that difference in the weight balance. The bull barrel, of course, puts a lot of weight in the barrel. This barrel, although a little shorter than the Shadow II, you could see in the video that is massively different from a weight and just mass perspective. So all in all, I think, like, from a balance perspective, nobody's gonna disagree with me that the Tanfoglio is a much better balanced gun versus the Shadow II, which is more of a very heavy on the front, like nosedive. Does that mean one is better than the other? I wouldn't say so. It's still personal preference, right? I think I love both. I shoot both, and I like shooting both. I'm not gonna say which one is my preferred of the two. Like I said, this is not really a comparison between the two head to head in terms of shooting or performance, if you will, just more of a design and parts. But the weight, I think it's important to mention. The trigger also ends up being quite different between the two guns because of the design of the internal parts that you saw, that trigger bar guide versus just a trigger bar spring in the Shadow 2, a simpler design in the Shadow 2, the absence of a fine pin block in the Shadow 2, and the presence of one in the Tanfoglio all creates a very different trigger experience. Out of the box, the Shadow 2, in my opinion at least, has a much better trigger than the Tanfoglio. Now, both guns here in front of you are fully upgraded, fully prepared for competition, have pro packages of their own worlds. Like this has everything you can imagine from Patriot Defense. This has everything you can imagine from either Imantac or Cajun Gun or CZ Custom, if you will. So when you go and you put that type of investment in a gun and you make them fully upgraded, then that significant difference in the trigger, both guns out of the box, kind of almost disappear. In my view, the Shadow 2 has a better trigger at the end, but the Tanfoglio gets so much better with all the upgrades that it's really not something that people are going to really use as an excuse to shoot one versus the other anymore. They're very toe-to-toe in that area. The weight, though, there's not much you can do in the Shadow to emulate the type of balance that you have here. You can use some brass grips and cut the slide, the relief weight from the slide, and things of that nature that I've seen people do in the Shadow. But honestly, I've shot those guns and it's still the balance. It's still not there. It's still not how you would have in one of these guns, in one of these Tanfoglio. So, having said that, I hope you enjoyed. I hope this has been informative to you. And now you probably, hopefully, you know more about these two guns and how they work than before watching this video. So, thank you for watching, and see you next time.